This is Novel Film. We read the book, watch the adaptation, and only discuss once we hit record. Today we're going to be discussing A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, written by Betty Smith and published in 1943. Originally published by Harper & Brothers, you now recognize them as HarperCollins. The book is a chronological prose narrative that spans from the year 1912 to 1918. It is written from the third-person omniscient perspective following Francie Nolan, and the basic structure of the novel is divided into 5 books that sort of span roughly each year of her life or between large events. It's not so clear-cut that it's like her birthday every book or something like that. It's more like she's vaguely an age in each book and various large life events happen in every one. Yeah. And they're sort of broken up according to new phases in her young life. Francie Nolan and her family live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn in 1912, which is also the neighborhood that the author Betty Smith grew up in, and so oftentimes the book is described as autobiographical, but I do think it's important to note that beyond it being the neighborhood that she grew up in, Betty Smith's life actually doesn't play that big of a role in the narrative of this book, so it's a bit exaggerated in my eyes.
That's interesting.
The family is, to put it mildly, dirt poor, but incredibly hardworking. Francie's mother is a pragmatic, bordering on stoic woman whose solution-oriented viewpoint is the only thing dragging the family to any semblance of stability. While Francie's romantic yet alcoholic father provides the kind of wonder necessary to not lose your mind when in their circumstances. Francie has a younger brother, Neely, who their mother subtly prefers, eventually building a sort of resentment between the two. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is a detail-rich novel with a prose style that defies what we think of as social realism, managing to portray things as they were in an incredibly stark manner while simultaneously utilizing a detail orientation that enriches the world being described, creating a lively text that situates the reader in the difficult reality Francie lives in, harsh and beautiful all at once. That was my quick synopsis.
Wonderful. Before we get deeper into it, can I just say thank you for suggesting this book.
Oh, no problem.
It has very quickly. I've never heard of it. I never heard of the movie. And it just immediately became one of my favourite books ever.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm so happy.
It's a favourite book from my childhood.
Yeah.
I wrote it when I didn't write it. Wow.
You wrote it?
I wrote it. No. I read it. I read it when I was about 14. And it's one of my mom's favourite books. And, yeah, it's like almost like a family heirloom at this point.
No, I just wanted to say that because this has been a trip reading. It's been such a good read.
Yeah, it's a really intense text because it manages to balance, like I said earlier, an incredibly detail-rich form of like social realism with the kind of questions and naivety and sort of newness that a young person might bring to that genre. And it manages to do this in a way that is both grounded and realistic and pragmatic without being nihilistic or negative in any way, which you might find. I think when we think social realism, we think like very dark masculine narratives where everything is bad and no one is happy. Yeah. And there are many bad things in this story and many people are not happy, but that isn't the point of the text. And if anything, the point of the text is resilience and class mobility and like a number of other things, but it's not trying to make you feel bad. No. Basically, it's not telling you that the world is bad.
But it's just like disarming enough or harrowing enough to make you fear that something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like it's sort of doing its best to portray the world as it is, which is a number of things at times contradictory at once. And it's very impressive that someone can hold space for these contradictory things in something as static as a text. And it's also probably what would become very difficult in any attempt to ever adapt it, because the sort of nuance you can have when you're viewing the world through a single person's eyes and you're privy to all of their thoughts and impressions, contradictory as they may be, there's space for that in the written text, whereas like in a movie or a TV show or whatever, in a motion picture, it's difficult to portray that same level of interiority because by definition the character, like the camera plays a role as a character in a way, and unless you literally put a GoPro on someone's head, you're not going to see the world from their perspective. Don't do that. Or do, I don't know.
No, that's a really good point. As well as, like, movies and TV shows will automatically have to be more economical with time and their tools of story conveying.
Yeah, the tools of the trade are very different.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what we're going to... Yeah, which is sort of the point of this podcast. I do think that the main themes of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn center around poverty, gender, and like I said before, resilience, though that's a more amorphous theme to describe. It does this through a couple of recurring motifs, especially pregnancy, literacy, social norms, solidarity. There's a lot of stuff about unions in there. And pedophilia, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
And I think especially pedophilia is difficult to portray and difficult to talk about in general, but portraying it in a motion picture is a tricky goal. I think it's also probably, there's the eponymous tree. That grows in the backyard of the tenement building that Francie's family lives in, that sort of brings a sense of beauty and wonder that Francie likes to sit and read under the tree. And I'm sure that basically everyone who has read this book immediately was like, oh, I too want to sit beneath a tree and read. It's the kind of image that sort of will be appealing and romantic to basically anybody who wants to read a book. I think that ultimately book readers are awfully aesthetically driven people, and reading under a tree is the goal. Again, actually, I want to bring back to another image that I really liked that stuck with me was Francie goes to the library every weekend and takes out a new book, going through the entire library index alphabetically. We can get into how weird that is another time. But every single weekend there is a new vase with flowers, or it's the same vase but new flowers. And these flowers are just as much a part of the library ritual as the book itself that she's taking out. Since they're always a different flower, they're always beautiful and fresh. It brings like rejuvenation and beauty into Francie's world. And obviously it's in the library. What's that trying to say? I think that's a really important detail, is that to Francie, these small things, these teeny tiny little fragments of her world are what bring together her reality. The flowers in the library are what make her happy. Yeah. These are the kind of details that are important to bring on in any kind of adaptation. I'm not going to set fire to anything if there aren't flowers in the library, but there needs to be something like that.
Yeah, certainly. Also, in terms of the flowers, also something that she dreams about having when she's older. When she's older, she'll have that bowl of flowers, and it's such a humble thing to want, which just stuck out to me as an important part of Francie's characterization, because there is a lot of longing, and those flowers kind of have that aspirational aspect, yes. Yeah. Which I just think is a really sweet detail. Yeah, it's one of the things that Francie longs for. Yeah,
I think for Francie, when I was thinking about how she was characterized, the things that stuck out to me was that she was an intelligent yet very introspective and observant person. She's kind of always... she's never really part of anything. She's never really taking part in the action. She's not in central situations. She's always observing them and describing them to herself and understanding her surroundings. Perfect for a narrator of a story. But she's also always considering what's right and what's wrong, and what does she want to be and how does she want to get there. And her internal narrative, her life, her viewpoint is a lot about who will she become and how will she become that person. And suddenly a bouquet of flowers in the library takes on this profound meaning. She's the kind of person who wants to buy new flowers every week. Well, what might that say about her? There's something quite romantic and subtle and sort of humble about it. But from her point of view, it's quite decadent. She wants to buy something that will die. It's wasteful. But it's beautiful, right? And that means it's valuable. So even if the money doesn't stretch that way, there is something to be said about what is or isn't valuable to people.
Yeah.
And I think A Tree Grows in Brooklyn repeatedly makes it clear that beauty and joy are incredibly valuable as the food on your table. I think we should probably talk a little bit about the characters that are important. So obviously we've talked about Francie, the main character. She has a younger brother, Neely, who I felt like a little soft spot for him.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually play that big a role in the narrative.
No.
You don't see him that much, but when he does show up, he does have a tendency to be quite sensitive and sweet, and he's also very much described as being like charming and quite good looking and sort of popular in the neighborhood, and that his mother kind of prefers him, not so because she like actively dislikes Francie or anything, it's just that Francie and she are quite similar, whereas Neely is more like his father, a charming, talented young man who apparently has like the locks of an angel. Which does bring us to Katie, the mother in the family, the matriarch. She's pragmatic and stoic and hardworking, and she's incredibly solution-oriented. She is probably what we'd oftentimes describe as like a survivor. She isn't someone who's so concerned with a number of other trivial things. Her goal is to make it through, and make it through in such a way that her children will be better off than herself.
Yeah.
Just like her mother before her, and that continues that sort of immigrant narrative of my life may not be great, but my children's lives will be better than mine, and their children's lives will be better than theirs, etc. Like, as one day you'll own the world, I don't know. And
but never enjoy life.
But never enjoy life.
Just make it better for you.
But I do think that something that's important to note is that she is also a romantic. It's a detail that's really easy to not notice or oversee because she is so pragmatic, because she is so solution oriented, because she makes decisions that are incredibly hard, but she knows what is the right decision because she has such a strong ethical compass, and she'll do what she thinks is right, even if it's painful, even if she doesn't want to be the one to do it, she'll do it. And that brings us to Johnny, the father, her husband, their parent. He is notably an alcoholic and sort of a bit of a schlub. But he's also...
Wait, sorry. What does schlub mean?
Schlub?
I've never heard this
You've
before.
never heard schlub? Okay, well, a schlub is like... I'm trying to think of something that isn't Yiddish.
Like a schmuck?
No, not a schmuck. A schmuck's not a nice person. A schlub is like someone who... They don't really have their shit together. They're kind of like discombobulated. They're definitely not succeeding in life.
No.
I think discombobulated is like a kind of a good word for Johnny. Like he and Katie became parents way too early. I think, again, another detail that's important to keep in mind is that they were like basically teen parents. I think they were like 19.
Exactly.
And both of them were pretty unprepared to suddenly be responsible for a child. And Johnny, who was... you know, Mr. Popular, hot young guy, talented singer, had his life ahead of him, suddenly is like, oh my god, I have to provide for other people. And he never really gets over that shock.
No.
Like, he never recovers from having to be a father.
Still
spends the rest of the story like drunk as a skunk. But he is, I think it is, all those negative things. But he is also an incredibly loving person who's dedicated to his family and does have a connection to the things we were talking about earlier, the beauty in life, the joy, music, art. The things that make life worth living are things that Johnny is in direct connection to. However, he may not otherwise know how to live a life. So that sort of like Johnny and Katie sort of even out, you know. Katie knows how to stay alive and Johnny knows how to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And two of them, you make get one good parent. So Katie has two sisters, Evie and Sissy. Evie doesn't really come up that much. Sissy is loving, romantic, she's motherly, she's attractive, she's charming, she's vivacious.
She's iconic.
She is iconic, it's true. And in stark contrast to Katie, she can't read. Again, you know, literacy is popping up again.
Yeah.
Pregnancy is popping up again because Katie clearly will get pregnant in a fucking heartbeat.
Yeah.
Whereas Sissy keeps having stillborns. I think it's something like 12.
Yeah.
It's a very high number. And again, that sort of motif of pregnancy, childbirth, parenthood, motherhood comes again. I like how versatile it is in this text. They're showing very many sides of it. And we see how, okay, Katie has to make incredibly difficult decisions because she has children, because she has healthy children, because she can carry a pregnancy to term. Whereas Sissy makes entirely different decisions based on the fact that she is not successfully having children. She desperately wants them, but men are leaving her. She's viewed as promiscuous and loose, unreliable. You know, she doesn't have the same things that Katie has because her ability to get pregnant varies so wildly from hers.
Yeah.
But I would say that those 5 characters are sort of the core structure that this story is built around. There are loads of other people, but these are the most important individuals. Yeah. There are a number of other side characters that will probably come up when we talk about the movie.
Yeah.
Like Flossie and Henny, the girls that Francie ends up working with at the factory, the salesman in the neighborhood, Mary Romley, and Sissy's Johns, the various men that she has married. We can get into that phrase later too. Yeah. Because they made an interesting decision in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about the movie.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely talk a lot about the characters. That's like a huge part of the adaptation that has really interesting connotations and shifts in the themes, I would argue. But for now, let's get some stats on. The movie adaptation of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was released in 1945. It was written by Frank Davis and Tess Schlesinger, directed by Elia Kazan in his directorial debut, and produced by Louis D. Leighton. The rights to the movie were acquired in a bidding war that took place before the book was published, which I think is quite interesting that the buzz was so big. And the book did also turn out to be incredibly popular.
So great was the immediate demand for this story that its first printing was exhausted within a few weeks. And as its fame grew, 5, 10, even 20 printings were not enough. Hundreds of thousands who could not buy copies borrowed them, while hundreds of thousands more read it as a serial in scores of newspapers across the country. Today, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn boasts an amazing, unprecedented number of readers, 65 million.
The rights to the movie were acquired in 1943 and sold for $55,000 to 20th Century Fox. Now, what's interesting is the budget for the movie was estimated at $3.6 million.
Like 1943 money?
1943 money.
That's so much money.
That's so much money. And it only made $3 million in the box office, so presumably it didn't do too well. However, it did win a lot of Academy Awards.
Yeah, I was going to say that's sort of interesting that it wasn't a commercial success, given that, I mean, both we have the pocketbooks that were sent out to soldiers in World War II, which sort of guaranteed a certain level of printing and sales. And then, the fact that it's an early Oscar winner. Yeah. I wonder if financial loss, like movies that made a financial loss, would get nominated for Oscars anymore. I can't think of a single Oscar that's been nominated that had a financial loss.
Oh my god, I think what the fuck was it called? Don't Look Up. I don't even know if that was a financial loss. It was not a good film.
Was it nominated for an Oscar?
It was nominated for an Oscar, and it's such a bad movie. And yeah,
it was a Netflix movie, right?
It was a Netflix movie.
It's very hard to tell. Like, Netflix is very hush hush about their money,
about their money sitch. Yeah. Oh my god.
I think they don't have any. Like, that's my theory. Is that Netflix doesn't have money.
Yeah, that's probably why they're refusing to pay Danish writers right now.
They're like, you can't have a sister on your account. She lives somewhere else.
Oh my god.
But tell me more about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Let's talk about that. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, and James Dunn, who plays Johnny, won the Oscar for Best Supportive Actor. And this is back when they had something called a Juvenile Award, which Peggy Ann Garner, who plays Francie, won.
I'll be honest, unjustified.
I think she did an okay job. I just don't think the characterization of Francie in the script works. It's a difficult one.
She says mommy so many times.
Yeah.
She's a very different character.
She is a very different character, and it's like they can't really decide on her age either. It also was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, which is the Library of Congress select culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant films, amongst others, Shrek. So
Shrek?
Yes.
Okay. I think I can't even argue against that. They did make ketchup green.
Yeah, it certainly had cultural, historically significance.
How upsetting.
How upsetting. So yeah, a very quick synopsis of the movie. It's interesting because a lot of what happens in the movie is straight out of the book, yet so much has been removed or is framed so differently, which we'll get into. So it sounds very similar.
Yeah, when you read it up,
yeah,
you would think it's a one-to-one adaptation, but it completely isn't.
It completely isn't, despite a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the scenes, a lot of the setups being straight out of the book. The way they're interpreted is so different. So it's set in Brooklyn in the 1910s, and it follows Francie Noland and her family working to make a better life for themselves and escape poverty. Francie is a studious young girl who dreams of sweeter things, encouraged by her warm and dreamy, although reckless and drunken father. The family is helmed by the resourceful and hard-working Katie, who gives up the sweeter things in life for the sake of saving money and keeping her family afloat. We also meet colourful characters such as the flirty and sweet-talking Aunt Sissy, and Francie's loud and obnoxious brother Neely, as well as the lonely police officer Mr. McShane, amongst others. So what immediately sticks out, and we can pick up from where you left off, which is the characterizations, as well as, first of all, pragmatically, the movie noticeably pushes together a number of characters. So Evie is out and is now a lot of the things that made Evie... She's such an unnoticeable character. But there are certain things about her, like her warmth and how she is married to this milkman who has this whole... I don't know.
Feud with a horse.
Feud with a horse, and at one point love triangle between them all. I don't really get it.
She is kind of like a middle point between Sissy and Katie.
Exactly.
She encapsulates both of their qualities in maybe a more balanced way.
Exactly. Yeah. But she's taken out of this adaptation, and kind of a lot of the elements from Evie's story, like the milkman and how she brings magazines from her job to Francie, and all of these things are kind of just put into Sissy's character. Sissy is very, very similar to Sissy in the books, which I'm quite happy about, but there's something about her story that has been diluted, which we'll get into, because that's, like you pointed out, a huge theme of the book is pregnancy, and that is something that they've decided to sort of represent in a far less poignant way in this version of Sissy.
It does seem like a lot of the character changes remove the more complicated and nuanced realities of life in the 1910s.
Yeah.
And sort of removes the more savory characters, you know? Things that weren't as socially acceptable in the 40s. They kind of get smoothed over or reworked in a way to make them a little more comfortable, a little more acceptable. It's a bit unfortunate.
It is, and I think it partly has to do with I'm interested in how people reacted to the movie, and I haven't really seen anything that was negative about it. All the reviews back then were very much praising the social realism of it, but I think the film is significantly less contemporary than the book. Yes, they've noticeably squished together a number of characters. So Sissy and Evie are one person, Flossie and Henny are one person. Henny is a young man who's ill with, not even sure what it is at this point, but is sort of terminally ill, and everyone knows he's going to pass away at some point, and it's this reality of not just, our neighbour is dying, but also perhaps just everyday life, that these kind of illnesses occur, and death is perhaps right around the corner for a lot of people who live under these conditions. He's been turned into this young girl
Yeah.
named after Flossie, who's also not a young girl in the book. She's also a teenager, young woman. Her story very much has to do with how she sews all these dresses that she loves. You know, she presents these dresses at, is it contests or...
It's dances.
It's dances.
She's like this unambiguously a flirt.
Yeah.
And she spends all her time making these beautiful dresses that like cover up a burn on one of her arms. And they take Flossie and Henny and make her and him into a young girl who is dying of whatever disease Henny had.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like they're sort of how to put it, it's I don't know, maybe like one of the earliest examples of really trying to pluck at the audience's heartstrings by making the character as unambiguously sympathetic as possible.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate because it takes away the humanity of Flossie, and Henny just gets totally like wiped off the page.
Yeah, there's also this it's interesting because the book it presents a lot of these tragedies without being judgmental, but sometimes quite humorous. And there is something tragically comical about Henny as well until he passes away. Then it's kind of not. But in his I'm dying daily, not complaining, but, you know, misery, everyone kind of just goes, yeah, still dying, good to see you.
Yeah, there's just some gallows humor about it, which maybe in 1940s cinema, that's not part of the American reality to be having those kinds of jokes.
No, but it's so interesting because it feels so much less, like the book just feels far more socially realistic, and there is a significant edge that doesn't exist in the film in the same way because of it. And like you say, the point of Flossie, Henny, little girl version is this sympathization, this plucking at the audience's heartstrings. The point narratively of Flossie in the movie does become very clear in one of the bigger culminations where, and this very much has to do with some of the changes they made with Katie and Johnny. One thing that kind of sticks out immediately is how Katie and Johnny become these saturated versions of who they were in the book. Like you very much pointed out, you don't get the internal universes of the characters in the movie. Other audiovisual languages are kind of, they take precedence. So we're kind of seeing more overall themes being explored via these perhaps more one-dimensional characterizations in what has been an internal struggle with Katie and with Johnny of survival versus living, and, you know, is it worth sometimes having something just to throw away, just to feel what that feels like, or should you just really save every piece of money you can and not enjoy life while you're here at any point? The frivolousness very much becomes Johnny's thing, somewhat true to his character in the book, but he becomes very much pitted against Katie, which is where Flossie comes back in. Because Katie, we don't get the nuance of Katie also being this romantic. We don't get the nuance of Katie also sometimes going, you know what, Francie can have a cup of coffee even though she doesn't drink it, just because it's nice to have the experience of having something you just pour away. That is a very important nuance in Katie that is erased from the film, and she's then instead this very much, helm of the family, spearheading them into survival, saving money, cutting off anything fun and joyful, and it becomes this very patriarchal, you should smile more, lady, thing
Smile,
that I'm not happy about. And you see this kind of conflict, I think, more in the camera work, and I think more in how they so they create this conflict as Johnny versus Katie throughout the thing, and it kind of works in its own merit of them having this combination of arguing about, well, Flossie at least had all these nice dresses, right, but she doesn't even have a proper burial. Like, Katie and Johnny arguing about that. And you can see in the camera work, it's very early, naturalistic camera work, which is really interesting. In one of the final culminations as well, before Johnny passes away, the confrontation at Christmas, Katie also tells him how we need to get work papers for Francie. This is right after Francie has discovered she wants to be a writer. And you sort of see how the camera shifts between them and creates more distance between them as they're having this conflict. So audio-visually, the themes are there of the push and pull of living versus survival. But it does erase these complex characters a little bit, and I think in a way that's unnecessary.
Yeah.
You can have complexities in characters, you just need to show it in their actions if you don't have the internal dialogue. So you could have had Katie occasionally letting Francie waste something, but they kind of wait with that till the very end and show it as like a character change in Katie because of Johnny's death, which is, for me, the most significant change in this.
Yeah, they end up being more thematic archetypes that are kind of arguing with each other as like a meta-textual layer in the movie, and like rather than the people that they're supposed to be like in the book.
Exactly.
I also found the age difference between the actors,
oh my God,
incredibly distracting.
Johnny in the book, I was just imagining as this incredibly young, hot, very charming.
Daddy.
Like, he's supposed to be 28. He's supposed to be
he's our age.
He's just this man.
He's like I'm pretty sure the actress is the right age. I think she's like 27 or 28.
I think she's very well cast.
She's well cast.
Yeah.
Cast. And the actor who plays Johnny is a more like seasoned, Hollywood actor, but I'm pretty sure he's in his 40s, and it completely changes the tone and dynamic of their relationship.
Yeah.
And it sets up a way more patriarchal scenario where, because he's so much older than her, you immediately think of him as more experienced, as wiser, as having lived more. Yeah. So suddenly that lends him a certain level of like credence in these arguments that if he had been a 28-year-old man, you as the audience would immediately think, oh, well, Johnny's probably right. Like, no.
And there's a lot of that infantilization of the women in the narrative. So straight off the bat, it is a far more dynamic experience than the book, because everything is squeezed into one scene, and this often happens with movie adaptations. They feel a lot more fast-paced.
Yeah, it's fair that a movie wouldn't span 14 years. Every year would be a second. Like,
it's an 8-hour movie.
You'd have to have like bathroom breaks.
I mean, this is why I would argue more movies should be adapted to miniseries, but I digress. So I think a lot of these patriarchal sort of undertones and overt things kind of come as a result of, like, this is my theory, is this was a film produced during the Hays Code times, which was this set of moral and ethical guidelines that for over 3 decades censored American films in order to uphold these conservative values. And I suspect that a lot of those themes that we talked about that are significant to the book were diluted because of these values, and that's how it became this far more patriarchal view of this family. Yeah.
It has to fit into this idea of like the American dream where the father is the head of the family, and that is absolutely not what's going on in the book.
No, at all. No. Again, like you say, they're teen parents. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. Katie is the pragmatic one and very much the matriarch, the head of the family. And Johnny respects that and knows that he has it too good with Katie and knows that she is a good woman that he would probably not have survived without in many ways. So, yeah, I think significantly themes of pregnancy, we can maybe talk about that a little bit.
Like sex and pregnancy are so central to the narrative, and they just virtually aren't in the movie.
Yeah, and this is where Sissy kind of comes in as an interesting change, because I feel like she's well cast as well. She comes across as very fun-loving.
Oh yeah, the actress is so charming and fun. I totally get like, oh yeah, that's Sissy. That totally makes sense.
Completely. But they do erase a lot of, so one aspect of Sissy's character is something that is very much a poignant part of the film, is her and Katie fall out, because she kind of recklessly suggests that the kids borrow someone's bike, and then the neighborhood starts accusing them of stealing, and Katie's like, oh, you cannot come around, like, you're just reckless.
She ends up being like a liability.
Yeah. In the book, it's a very different thing that happens. She works for a condom factory, and the kid's desperate for some adult contact or something to do, are begging her to stay, and she has to go to work or a date or something, and they really want her to stay, and she's like, okay, let's see if there's something fun in my bag that you can play with, and it's a box of condoms that isn't very explicitly explained, but that's what it is. And the kids kind of, I think my interpretation is they make a string out of the condoms, like she gives it to them, telling them not to open it. Because,
which is a great thing to say to kids.
Yeah. So of course
don't open his box.
Yeah. And so the string of condoms just flies out the window.
Oh my god.
It's just like... Yeah, and at that point, that's why Katie cuts Sissy off, and of course you wouldn't see that in a 1945 movie. But
honestly, even now, would you show a string of condoms unless it was like NC-17?
Yeah, quite. It's really interesting. Yeah, the book is so much more explicit. It's so much more, I would just say, contemporary is the word that
comes to mind a lot.
Yeah, it comes to mind a lot. Also in how they talk about gender.
There are some very, very interesting discussions on like gender roles and how, as a child, the adults around you and their respective genders show you your options for adulthood. And Francie has a really hard time accepting what her options are and really wants to find another way to be a person. And that, again, completely absent from the movie. But I also can't picture for myself a movie from the 40s getting into that.
Yeah, and another theme that I think it's there. And again, a film does have to be economical with time. You do have to weigh out what's the most important thing to represent. And a lot of the time, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn kind of focuses on the emotional aspect of it, the personal, what's identifiable for an audience. And perhaps the most identifiable thing for the broad audience is struggle and living and finding sort of hope in a life that is tough. But I do think there are very important themes, especially because it is titularly set in Brooklyn, of immigration and generational trauma from parents from the motherland, and a character that gets sidelined, I don't know how else to put it, a lot maybe, is Mary Romley. I don't know how you felt about that.
She kind of had that, how to put it, it's sort of like in the book, obviously she's a first generation immigrant, so she isn't necessarily American in the same way that her own children and their children are, that she hasn't been born there.
Yeah.
But she's more of a person, whereas in the movie she sort of represents, the old world, and I just get that, like, how to put it, that trope of woman from the old world with the secret knowledge, and it's one of those things where it fits in to the sort of propagandistic aspects of this movie around immigration, but ultimately I found it to be kind of like dehumanizing. And again, this is of course looking at the movie from a modern perspective, but it did not sit with me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the text felt more, again, contemporary and modern in its interpretation. So it's not like there wasn't that understanding of, the first generation immigrant in the family that brought the family tree to the States is also just a young person that got pregnant and was in a bad situation. What I think contrasts with the movie a lot is a lot of Mary's misery comes from a not good situation with a husband who was incredibly patriarchal and the head of the family. He made a number of terrible financial decisions. Mary tried to save up and he wasted the money on poor decisions. And a lot of it wasn't his fault. A lot of it is xenophobia and all these other interesting problems about the States.
I think the movie is very preoccupied with solidifying a certain attitude and narrative around immigration and what it means to be an American. And the book doesn't really have an agenda in that way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that means that details that are actually important around immigration, like navigating bureaucracy you have no familiarity with, navigating a foreign language, navigating norms, navigating scams.
Yeah.
Those things, the things that are actually really difficult about being an immigrant, end up being erased for the more convenient nationalistic narrative of America is great, it's so much better now that we came here.
Yeah.
And like the truth is significantly more complicated.
Yeah. And it's, you know, there is one aspect of it which is the education and the ability to rise up in society, which it's true, that's very much the main difference a lot of immigrants sought out to achieve coming to the States is we could actually maybe build a life better than our parents instead of being stuck in that.
Upward mobility is suddenly an option.
Exactly. And that is something the movie also, you know, has decided to keep whilst not including the rest of it. So in many ways it does feel like, oh, the movie is a one-to-one adaptation. It just cut out a bunch of stuff because of time. But when you start to see this pattern of perhaps a propagandized image, perhaps a more conservative value agenda, you realize some of these choices are kind of interestingly made.
I can see why it's in the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
Suddenly.
Yeah, quite. Something we haven't talked about is Sissy's Johns.
Oh, yeah. The conveniently not calling them Johns.
Yes.
I wonder why.
Again, this is the theme of pregnancy that's kind of diluted. How else to put it?
Yeah, I think... and I'm a little bit embarrassed, actually, at how long it took for this to click for me. But a lot of the men that Sissy is with... I mean, she does leave a number of them, but a number of them also leave her. You know, when she suddenly can't seem to have a child, she also becomes worthless. And so you sort of end up in a situation where her jumping from person to person gets conflated with being promiscuous, and it affects her reputation, and people kind of look down on her. But at the same time as people are leaving her behind.
Yeah.
Sorry, not people, men. Men are leaving her behind and aren't taking care of her. And when she can't fulfill her gender role, that love seems to shrivel up and leave. And that's not the kind of thing this movie's trying to confront.
No, they kind of reduced it to this conflict of she wants to remarry and she is technically still married to someone else. And that's the main conflict. That's as controversial as it gets.
Divorce.
Yes.
Which we thought Henry VIII took care of, but no.
But no.
Catholicism.
I guess that's the major Catholic element that gets to take precedent in the film. But she also, you know, in the book, she calls all of her lovers John, even regardless of whether or not
they're all just John.
But in the film, no longer John.
Yeah.
Now we're Bill, or what is it?
I think it's Bill.
Yeah.
I googled it because I wanted to make sure that John meant the same thing then as it does now. So for anyone who doesn't know, John is... I'm not sure if I would call it slang, because at this point this is what it's called. But a John is a man who frequents sex workers. So basically the client is a John.
Yeah.
And so it seems like a kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke that Sissy keeps having all of these Johns. And it sort of adds to that layer of people seeing her as promiscuous and it's not so great. And so when they removed it from the movie, I was like, okay, well, I have to check. Was this a phrase at the time?
Yeah.
And it was.
I mean, that's the only explanation I can think to why they changed it.
Yeah.
Like,
they just could not do that.
Like,
it's too explicit.
She does not work in a condom factory. They're all called Bill, and it's just about divorce. Like,
she doesn't fuck around.
Yeah. She just steals a bike. This is it. Yeah, there's also one character we actually haven't talked about, considering talking about the bike. It's perhaps not that important, but I think they've actually kept this quite loyal to the book, which is Officer McShane.
Officer
who is
McShane.
a very... there are a couple of different cops in the book and situations, and they've just all made them about Officer McShane, which I think makes sense. That's a very normal adaptive change.
Yeah.
That's completely objective.
He's like the one time where I felt like the book had an agenda.
Yeah.
The upright Irish cop, but I was like, ew.
Yeah.
Again, a modern response.
A very modern response. And he does stop being a cop in the end, so
he retires.
He does. He changes professions, goes into politics. Anyway, also ill, but
Also ill.
less ill. But he's very much this life that Katie could have if she did go against her perhaps Catholic values and just went, I'm gonna divorce Johnny and just remarry this guy who's very clearly into me. This is kind of also, I think that they show this enough in the film. Like, he's there and he's interested in Katie. He's withdrawn and so is she, and they're both proud enough to not go against their families, but they're both in these situations where Katie's husband is unable to provide for the family because of his substance abuse or because of his alcoholism. And I think Officer McShane's wife is dying, or is...
Yeah, she's very ill, and I
Yeah.
think she ends up being sent to a sanitarium. And then toward the end of the book, she ends up passing away, and Johnny at that point has passed away, and then, you know, because their respective spouses are dead, they're, like, free to marry each other.
Yeah.
And it sort of neatly wraps up Katie's life at the end of the book. Like, nice little bow on top, she'll be fine.
It's a little, it's
a little too neat, almost.
Yeah, but it is also, it's interesting because it's very film character does the right thing and still gets what they want in the end. Katie does want a romantic, lovely life, but she does want to remain a person with integrity. That is also a very strong theme throughout the book, and I think the film, where she's not going to remarry him because she needs money, she's not going to remarry him because now she can, or it's kind of very clear that she sticks to her guns of we're going to be finding that they are incredibly poor after Johnny passes for a while.
And she rejects the offer from McShane of money.
Yeah, and she rejects a lot of offers of help and money that feels too much like charity, which is very much got to do with her pride in the film. In the book, it kind of shows the culture around just their neighborhood, or just, I think, society at the time.
Yeah, there is that running idea of, like, it's not just that, you know, that it's lowering her pride or that she's too good for that. It does have these couple of examples of how charity is used to bolster the public image of somebody who's wealthier.
Yeah.
And that you actually just end up being used as a tool in their, you know, self-image, like with Francie and the doll. And various underlying political themes that are going on. So the book does complicate why she might not want to accept money or not want to be part of that kind of situation. Yeah, where the movies is like, she's too powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Or why she would reject this or not immediately go for this well-established guy who's into her. And in the end of the movie, she just very explicitly says, I will marry you, not because of money, not because of this, but because I like you and you're a good man.
You're good enough.
Yeah. And that's very typical, like, the character does the right thing, and like, you know, she still figures out her own issues before being rewarded by the narrative. But yeah, those are sort of the main differences, I would say. So as far as adaptations go, what are some of our conclusions about this adaptation?
I think, like we've sort of mentioned a couple times, it's impressive almost how one-to-one it is, while simultaneously being a completely different story.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I had a really hard time getting through this movie. I did not enjoy it. Probably also important to mention, I may be biased because I don't like black and white movies.
Yeah.
So I just want to be honest.
Yeah.
But besides Sissy, I found the movie pretty difficult to watch. The actress who plays Francie is not very good. The character changes annoyed me. The age gap between Johnny and Katie was just so distracting. Yeah. And I couldn't get past the, like, 1940s Americana propaganda aspects. It just did not speak to me. Yeah. It hurt.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like I had been, like, reading the book felt like I was given this little window into some of the more complex modern thoughts that people have had during a time where I would maybe presume they didn't. Yeah. And suddenly I am sent into this conservative understanding of the past as being ignorant and limiting. And why that is a whole conversation. But yeah, I think as an adaptation, it is a good... again, I think the audio visuals, props to that, and the production design, they basically built the whole building, which is probably where the $3 million went. $3.6 million.
Building the entire tenement.
Just building a whole set of the stairs and how the way it's shot in one frame, showing both how small and tiny a Brooklyn staircase is, but still including all these neighbours in the background. You know, there was very much this visual narrative storytelling that I do think is good.
Yeah, they definitely put a lot of effort into... I mean, I'm not a historian, so I can say whatever I want, but it does seem like they put a lot of effort into making a historically accurate movie, which, thinking about, like, there is 30 to 40-ish years between the movie and the book. And when you think about, like, adaptations now, right, like when we adapt things like from the 80s, we're already making mistakes.
I think it's even less than that. I think it's like this would be the equivalent of if we made a film now about the 2000s. Like, I think it's only 20 years, because the book came out...
Well, no, but the book is about the 10s.
Oh, yeah.
And the movie's about the 40s, or the movie's from the 40s.
Yes.
So I think, like, there's...
that sense, yeah.
There's a 30-year span where, I think you're right, like, it's very visually detailed, it's very visually rich. It maybe hits things on a nose in a way that we might struggle to do now, because these things are no longer living memory.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
Are they?
Well, that's an
my grandma's
interesting
90.
thing. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think we would point out different things in an adaptation today.
The emphasis would be different.
We would emphasize on, oh look, they had horses, and maybe that's not the most interesting aspect for someone in the 40s. It's like, that's just what my grandmother lived like. Who cares? Right. That's my take, really, on that. When the movie came out, that was living memory. It is barely that. It's almost 100 years ago. Yeah. You know, if not more.
It's 110.
It's 110 years ago. The book is placed 110 years ago. And so, we would probably note other aspects of history that have been forgotten, that are culture shocks to us today.
It probably depends a lot on the reader. Yeah. I think it depends a lot on what it is about the book that stuck with you. Because I do think that, especially readers in the 40s might watch this movie and really, really enjoy it. Yeah. But I can certainly say that I did not. No, and I think...
But
what would you want from an adaptation? Let's get into the more fun aspect. Like, what would we want to see?
So I mean, I did mention that I like the visuals in the film, but I think the visuals in the book are very, very different existence that I really missed. It's a very visual book that metaphorically and explicitly show us the hardships of their lives, both in Katie's rough hands make like a huge appearance throughout the book, and it's talked about in the film, but we don't see it, and that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's almost like we would probably have like the same issues today, where it's like, how could you possibly get a Hollywood starlet to have fucked up ass hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would we allow that, you know?
Yeah. Well, there is this interesting trend I've noticed in Hollywood recently where they just give beautiful actresses prosthetics like a lot now.
Really?
Yeah, like was it Tammy Faye? Jessica Chastain just has this fat suit on her face, and it's just like, it doesn't look good, guys. This is terrible makeup. It won best makeup, and I was just like, this is bad. Just hire a fat actress. What is wrong with you? No offense, Jessica Chastain, but like, why? It's just to have more ugly actresses, whatever that means. You know, just it's fine. But yeah. You could probably easily show some rough hands and cut them in to look like Katie's or whatever. But
I love how we've like instantaneously like over concentrated on one very small detail.
In a very small detail, yeah. I think
I would really want it to
yeah.
be a mini-series.
Yeah.
And not a movie. And in my head, I imagine that each book would be a season. And that way you can actually really get into those like detail-oriented little bits and pieces.
Yeah.
You can concentrate on the flowers in the library. You can concentrate on Katie's hands.
Yeah.
You can concentrate on the banisters. Like,
yeah.
And also it allows you to kind of follow the build of the story a little bit more naturalistically than a movie, which has to have, you know, a beginning, middle, and an end, and has to be built, blah, blah, blah.
Well, what's interesting is I think the book almost has as many, because it's divided into, 5 books? Mm-hmm. And a film has approximately 8 chapters. So one could have perhaps included each aspect of Francie growing up in that sense. But that does rush a story quite significantly. And I think a miniseries would be the right take for something like this because it is so detail heavy.
Yeah.
And the beauty of Brooklyn in this book is the richness of the different people living there with the very, very different experiences.
It could be a really interesting departure from current costume dramas because right now we have the Gilded Age and Bridgerton, and these are all costume dramas that spend a lot of time occupied with the lives of extreme wealth.
Yeah.
And I understand why that's entertaining, obviously, but it's also to some degree kind of like historically inaccurate because it's the only thing we're concentrating on. I think this would be an opportunity to talk about life, you know, quote unquote, as it was, for people that we actually are more closely related to.
Yeah.
And it would allow us maybe even like thematically in the greater reality of TV to talk about something else. To be a great big departure, maybe even like almost antagonistically to these, you know, costume dramas that are all about glitter and silk.
I think that's a really important point. Yeah, because it is as if poverty gets to exist as like a side note in a lot of these
a threat
dramas.
to a middle-class woman.
Yeah.
But never actually poor.
But never actually what happens. And I think that's why there is something that feels also so personal about the story, because it is so, again, detail heavy in those small things in life that you kind of pick up on as a child. Culturally, how adults talk about you, how they talk about your parents. I mean, we're both raised in a country our parents weren't from, and there is something interesting in observing, I am considered equal to all these children because we look the same, but culturally my parents are kind of talked about very differently. They're made fun of, they don't get treated equally, and there's something very interesting about the immigrant experience.
You would get to get into those details. Yeah, you get to get into like what happens when your parents don't speak the language. What kind of hardship does that create? And the movie definitely didn't get into that, and I don't think a movie could. And I also think that a TV show, given that we have, you know, I mean, I think Game of Thrones set the scene for talking about pedophilia and rape. So I would love to talk about it in a way where the narrative is aware that it's rape. I think that way we could go into some of the more disturbing and upsetting occurrences in the book. We could talk about the pedophile that is like haunting the neighborhood and ends up attacking Francie.
Yeah.
We could really talk about how traumatizing that is and how upset her parents are, because I think it was a traumatizing event for them as well.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
We can talk about the young girl that gets stoned. We can get into those really harsh realities.
Yeah, there's also the mythology around pedophilia that, I don't know, I mean, we grew up during stranger danger talks a lot, and
early internet.
Yeah, there was a lot of that chat that you're exposed to very early on as a child.
Yeah, I think especially in America, the way that child abuse is talked about, the way that pedophilia is talked about, we're oftentimes accusing certain groups of people of being these pedophiles. And then when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about like the public conversations.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about how we talk to children about it. And that's a really big part of this book is, you know, one of the opening scenes is Francie being perfectly aware of the fact that playing up to this like garbage man, allowing him to pinch her will get her an extra penny. Allowing this uncomfortable boundary crossing contact with an older man will benefit her. And so she has to put up with it. And that's a really horrible reality that's very difficult to talk about and very difficult to acknowledge. And a movie in the 1940s was never going to do that. And I think maybe a new adaptation would have the opportunity to do that.
And yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I would love it if this was interpreted today, if this was adapted today as a miniseries, because so many of these themes are important right now at this time in history in a way that perhaps they weren't, that they have been relevant since they came into existence in this book. But
yeah, like humanizing our past, like discussing these experiences that keep recurring, acknowledging that whether you're comfortable talking about it or not, your great grandparents had sex. They had teen sex, they had teen pregnancies, they had STDs, they had rape, they had pedophilia, they had assault. That these are parts of the human experience that we need to find a way to talk about and not just, you know, cover up or make cute.
And they had conversations about sex that perhaps were far more modern than we would assume. Something that really stuck out to me was how Francie and her mother talk about sex. I love this chapter in the book where Francie falls in love with this soldier guy who kind of, I guess, manipulates her into sex.
But certainly tries.
And Francie decides not to have sex with him and kind of realizes this is probably the only chance I will have ever gotten, because he's going off to war, or he's married, he's engaged.
He's going off to war, and then he's engaged. The First World War was hit, and then it turns out before he ships out, he got married, and the wife sends her a letter back, and Francie's like heartbroken and talks to her mother about it. And her mom's like surprisingly chill. Yeah. She's just like,
you should have probably slept with him.
I love that. I respect Katie for that.
So much.
And I think especially in I'm gonna say it. Catholic households.
Let's talk about it.
Especially people who aren't Catholic themselves, have very specific ideas of what it's like. And I think this is sort of an attitude that people have around quote-unquote conservative religious households. Like, I'm sure if you asked Muslim families, they would probably report similar experiences where there are conversations in these households. They are had. And sure, it differs from household to household. And, like, I can say, from my own family, that one side of my family had no conversations about it at all, and that's a problem in and of itself. While the other side of my family was more open and had more frank discussions, and so you can't really make these assumptions about what people do or do not know or how they talk about it.
That is so interesting. The exact same dynamic in my two family branches happened where my grandmother was a teen mum Had no idea, didn't even know childbirth was going to, I don't know if we can talk about this, I'll ask after. But she had no idea childbirth would even hurt.
Oh God!
And she had to get
That's
married.
a brutal awakening.
It's a brutal way to find out.
Yeah.
It was very tough. And she had to get married at 17 and was, you know, my grandfather was a very lovely man. But she eventually broke a lot of gender roles and going off and doing her own thing and getting divorced and stuff. And on my dad's side, a lot of very open conversations about, at least from my grandmother's side, she seemed significantly more, I don't know, her story seemed a little bit more
Informed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the interesting thing, is that, like, you know, Katie in the book is this very pragmatic woman, and that pragmatism extends to sex. She loves her husband. She has sex with her husband because they're making love.
Yeah.
And, you know, that leads to 3 children, and she doesn't hide from her own children how they were made.
Yeah.
And I think we have this idea that religious households, no matter how strict they may be, absolutely do not discuss sex.
Yeah.
And that is definitely true for some people, but it's not always true. And I think it would be interesting to have this more nuanced view of the world. Like, okay, in the 1910s, sex is an obvious reality. You know, contraceptives aren't as available as they are today, or who knows when you're listening to this, maybe they're not. And
oh God.
But, you know, the teen pregnancy is a really big theme of this book, and you know, who's responsible for teen pregnancy, who has to live with the consequences, what are the social mores and norms around this. I think if we adapted this into like a prestige miniseries, that would be able to take so much space. And it'd be such an important conversation given what is going on right now.
Yeah. And sort of the women could take precedent in their conflicts. Sissy has a whole narrative of how she adopts a child, which is also connected to a teen pregnancy. There's a whole thing going on there that's been erased from the film as well, which I think is really important, both to show Sissy's sort of warmth and her cunningness and her desperation to have a child. Yeah.
I think also the way that Sissy can't read, but it doesn't make her any less. It doesn't affect, you know, her ingenuity or her actual intelligence. It's just a reality of her life.
Yeah, she's incredibly socially intelligent. She knows exactly how to sort of swing people and swing something to get people to do what she wants.
I think I would really want more of the very embarrassing Johnny stories. Yeah. I really want that fishing day.
Oh God, what happened? I forgot.
It's where so Johnny, and I think this is something that the movie adaptation completely just didn't even try to get into, that would be really cool to get into in a miniseries, is that it's great that Johnny is a romantic. It allows for hope and for resilience, and that is an important ingredient in getting on with your life and surviving. But the other side of that coin is that Johnny is also naive and ignorant, and he gets all of his information about the world from like songs.
Oh, this story.
And he takes the kids out in a boat, and he borrows another little girl from a neighbor, and he wants to give them this beautiful day, but he knows nothing about fishing. They get horribly sunburned. The little girl falls into the water and like destroys her pretty dress, and she's only like 2 or 3 and doesn't speak much. And it's just a horrible day. They don't catch any fish. They're sunburned. They're completely wet. He falls into the water at one point.
Oh God, yeah.
He's had a horrible day, and then at the very end, the little girl, I think she like smiles, or she said it was fun or something.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like,
thank you, mister.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of okay, but it's one of the things where like romanticism is fine, but maybe don't take it that far. Yeah, because you'll literally fall into the Hudson River. It's disgusting. Yeah. And you can get into more of those like duality situations.
Oh yeah, I think the duality of also just the relationship with someone who has alcoholism or substance abuse, which again I think is very relevant to the, I guess, generational trauma and a lot of this substance abuse and alcoholism happens across a lot of different social ranks.
Yeah, I think realistically speaking, almost everyone knows someone or is related to someone who has substance abuse problems. And
we're not great at talking about it still. And when we don't always acknowledge it becomes very much about villainization often.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about the complexity of loving someone who is so great, but who is also the worst thing that's happened to you at the same time because of the substance abuse issues. And there is this one line where I think Frances says, what is it? She was who she was in spite of and because of her father. And I think that sums up that complexity of having that relationship to a parent, or even just all of Katie and Johnny's relationship, why she probably sticks by him longer than one might do today.
I think that something that is very important to try to recreate is the differences between what people outside of your reality say and do and think about you and say and like think you should do, and then the reality of your own situation and the reality of what is keeping you going. And the truth of the matter is, like, okay, from the outside it looks like Johnny is, destroying the family, bringing them down, that his alcoholism is ruining them, and to some degree it's true. At the same time, however, Johnny brings warmth and love and music and whimsy, and you can't have one without the other.
No.
You can't just take flaws from people and have all the good stuff.
Yeah.
And Francie's very adamant about loving her father and that she should be allowed to love her father.
Yeah.
People really think that she shouldn't, or that she should resent him or hate him. And it's significantly more complex than that.
Exactly. And again, stretching this across a miniseries, it would exist in the details, and that is where these problems exist in one's life quite often. Which brings me back to also, again, visuality in the book, which I think the thing about miniseries today is it could allow to be far more cinematic and have some of these elements that, because TV shows today have pretty much the budget of films, if not bigger budgets at this point.
It's the era of the prestige drama.
It is. And we're going back to, which I very much appreciate, a time where more time is spent on preparing for the next season, and the writers' rooms get to spend longer writing.
Have a plan,
actually.
Who knew having a plan was a good idea?
And also have very cinematic TV shows that, for lack of a better word, but there is something about audiovisual language which there are missed opportunities, I think, in the film that I would definitely prioritise in adapting this today, both in Katie's hands, but also there are a lot of visual contrasts of dirty faces and roads contrasted with neighbourhoods with lots of trees, or the young girls that have blonde curly hair and pretty dresses contrasted with Francie's kind of humble outfits. There is a lot of visual storytelling that I think is very cinematic in the book. Like,
would translate well.
Translates well, and it would translate well. And there is this thing in film where if you want to show someone, I can't remember who said this, but if you want to show someone who's run out of water, like wandering a desert, don't show the bottle being completely empty, show them having a little bit of water left. And I thought about this a lot with this constant measuring of food by the scale, like a penny's worth of, go get a penny's worth of parsley, go get a penny's worth of potato or whatever for this meal, for this, and that kind of constant small measurement of, not just doing a big shop of food and then, but you can only afford to really live off of 1 penny at a time and certain groceries, as well as Christmas. I mean, I think having each episode focus on a season would work, but what I would also prioritise perhaps is how Christmas in the book becomes a significant visual indicator of how well they're doing.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way.
I thought it was such a missed opportunity because they just do Christmas once and it's right before John dies.
They do maybe the most iconic one of the Christmases where they grab the Christmas tree and they sing coming up the stairs. And it's
exactly.
That specific instance is very, American Christmas. But it certainly has way more impact when juxtaposed with the less fun Christmases that they have.
Where they play the North Pole game, pretending to be survivors. That would be a very classic way of showing someone being poor is, right, let's play a game. Let's pretend like we're trying to survive an expedition on the North Pole where we don't have any food, because we don't have any food. Because we actually don't have food. And that also shows a very warm side of Katie. And I thought the North Pole game was definitely going to be in the film. But again, there's a difference between how you would adapt it today and back then. But these are sort of visual storytelling elements in the book that would be a missed opportunity. You can show a lot and tell that way. A miniseries would not need to over-explain too much if they just effectively used these significant scenes in the book.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we both came to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Where it was this needs to be a miniseries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably going to be a lot of book conclusion. Well,
maybe. I think also we need to take into account that this is over 500 pages.
Yeah.
Or is this about? And, we've reached a point where it's normal to do the double movie. And, I'm of two minds. I guess I'm gonna have to accept it. But
part 1 and part 2?
Yeah. With Harry Potter.
Oh, I have so many thoughts about that.
We can get into it when we talk about something that's adapted that way. But I do think that with a novel like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is incredibly detail rich and spans a long amount of time. It does take from, I think she's 11 or 12 in the first part until she's about 18 at the end. I think that kind of thing it's very just make a miniseries of it. Yeah. Just do that. Now that that's an option. Yeah. Do it. Yeah. Yeah. Please, HBO.
Honestly.
Hire Moina.
I am available pretty much every day this week.
This week.
And several weeks moving forward. Just
hire us.
Be very happy to write this for you guys. Don't worry about it.
I think, we don't have some kind of score system set up, and I don't think we will, but
no.
It's a really impressive and amazing book, and it makes sense that it's still in print. Yeah. I understand why the movie is basically forgotten, and it should be a miniseries. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that sums it up.
Pretty much. Thank you for listening to Novel Film.
See you again next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Really? Look at the tree. It's growing again, just like Papa said. I feel kind of sad. Like we're saying goodbye to something. Yeah.
If you want to read next month's novel and receive updates on future episodes, you can follow us at novel_film on Instagram. You can find past episodes on wrir.org in the archives. For business inquiries, you may reach us at novelfilmpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Novel Film, hosted by Bridie Baker and Moina Soderstrand, and produced by Melissa Vaughan for WRIR.